tool like Simulink to model certain system equations and how to create robots in simulation using this. We'll look specifically at one example today, which is a differential drive robot. I'll show you what this is. We'll talk about robot navigation. We'll also look at model fidelity in terms of having different kinds of models at different levels of details. And we'll end with an overview of embedded code generation, including a little bit about how to work with ROS nodes. So overall, this is an introductory session which should give you an outline of what a robotics engineer needs to have as skills. And we hope this will be very useful to you. We will share our email addresses and all the resources and the slides as well. So if you're interested in taking it forward, then you can use these resources and you can also get in touch with us. So I believe I've already shared this survey form. I'll show you the responses. We didn't ask for your name and department anymore. We just wanted to know what your interest is and what your level of current knowledge is. So let me show you the results from our survey form as well. Around 20 people have responded. So from what I can see, most people are aware of ordinary differential equations, mathematical modeling, and control systems design. Not many people have worked with forward inverse kinematics, navigation, or ROS. So maybe we'll spend a little bit overview time here, and maybe we'll show this part in a little more detail because people will be able to follow. So we'll try to keep a nice balance of this. I can see most people are familiar with MATLAB and Simulink and not with the advanced tools. So that's fine. We'll spend time on the advanced tools. And most people are beginners, a few intermediate experienced people as well. So that's good. And just looking at extra details, people have asked about basic introductory information. That's fine. ROS, this is good. Model predictive control is outside of scope today, but you can reach out to us and we can help you with that. So I think almost the rest of this stuff, we're covering most of it today. Okay, so thanks for filling out that survey form. This is very useful to know. So let me first try and start out with a very basic introduction to robotics. Why do we want to work in the area of robotics? What is it anyway? So in terms of what a robot is, we define this as a machine which can carry out some series of complex actions. It should be able to do that automatically. And the main idea behind a robot is this actions can be programmed by a computer. So a car is not a robot, even though it has complex actions inside, because you typically don't program a car that much unless it's an autonomous car. So a robot is something which you can program to perform different tasks. And they can come in many shapes and sizes. So you're absolutely right. So that's a Google Waymo self-driving car. It looks like a normal car, kind of small, but it's got this sensor pod on the top. This is a very famous Asimo humanoid robot made by Honda. They've been making this one very popular since around the last 20 years or so. And these Amazon delivery drones are something which are now being brought into the market to make these deliveries more efficient. So these are all examples of different kinds of robotic systems. And if you're interested in robotics, you might end up working on one of these systems or something similar to this in the future. Now, let's take a look at this one. There's no audio, so this is one of the Boston Dynamics robot. This robot is actually more agile than I am. I mean, I cannot do all of these actions on my own. So these robots are getting very, very capable. You know, they can move around, they can do complex actions, they can balance, etc., etc. They can jump around. So this is one of the most advanced robots. But we still have a lot of problems which are unsolved in the area of robotics. So if I show you a couple of more examples of the same robot, you can see even on a flat plane, it's not able to keep its balance. This robot is struggling to open a door and then go through it. Many of these are from DARPA's challenge. So DARPA is the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. They make these robot challenges every year that these robots have to open doors and do all kinds of complex things. So you can see some of the funny fails there. So even though a robot can be quite strong, quite agile, tasks that require a lot of skill are still beyond quite a lot of robots. And what we perceive as intelligence is very difficult to program into machines. So today we'll be looking at what it takes to get some robots working and how you can do this with MATLAB and Simulink, and what it takes for this robot to move all these joints and how do we get started with that kind of thing. Okay. So some challenges of autonomous system development. We have to apply multi-domain expertise. We have to have many different kinds of algorithms. There might be vision algorithms, there might be algorithms for movement, there might be algorithms for navigation, planning, etc. We need end-to-end solutions, so we need to go all the way from software to a working physical prototype or even a production thing. And we need both a certain level of technical depth and a certain level of system stability. Because if robots are going to be actually useful, they'll have to work alongside humans in the real world. So we have to make sure that systems are reliable and that they can work alongside us without causing harm. Okay, so these are a few of the challenges of autonomous systems development. And one of the most important things which drives development or research and development is the fact that I mean, we are quite good at designing things. Most engineers are okay at designing things, but it's actually the testing phase, in the testing phase, that you find most of your errors. So you do something nice on your PC, you handwrite a bunch of code, and then when you take it out into the field, like those robots, many of those were probably multi-million-dollar machines, you only find out in the field when they are failing. And the cost of doing this escalates quite a lot because it takes a lot of time to develop these systems. So what we're going to show you today are some simulation tools with which you can do more and more testing in the starting part. You can design a robot completely inside simulation. You can write all the algorithms, you can work with the navigation codes, etc., etc. So this cost happens right at the beginning, and therefore you don't have to pay much farther down in the development process, which is a much better way of doing things. It saves a lot of time and effort. So I hope that makes you understand a little bit about why we are talking about simulation. Basically, we need to do first modeling and simulation. We need to generate code from our simulations, and then we go to the test and verification phase. So this thing, which is called model-based design, is one of the most important ideas to get across for building real systems. Today, we'll be talking about this part, the modeling and simulation part, and we'll be showing you how to do this in MATLAB and Simulink. And we'll also cover a little bit of code generation. Okay, so who are we? So MathWorks is the company that develops MATLAB and Simulink. So MATLAB is a programming environment for engineers and scientists, and it's designed to be very friendly for doing mathematics and programming. And then Simulink is the other tool that we make. We'll be spending most of our time here today. So this is a block diagram environment for doing simulations and model-based design for multi-domain systems. And the idea is that inside simulation, you can explore and test different systems, which would be very difficult to do in the real world. And you can also generate C, C++ or HDL code directly from Simulink models. So we'll show you a bit of this today. And overall, we will be looking at these kinds of things. So we'll be looking at a little bit of this entire workflow. So a typical robot has to have some kind of sensors. It has to be able to perceive from the sensor data what's in the environment. It has to decide and take certain actions, and then it actually has to act. So we'll try to go basically have an overview of all this. We'll look at path planning for mobile robots. So this is like a building in which a robot is driving around using LiDAR sensors. And we'll show how MATLAB and Simulink models can work with ROS code and how you can deploy this for real robots or simulators. So that's what we'll be looking at today. Why use MATLAB and Simulink for this? Because we have a lot of out-of-the-box algorithms for different applications, as you'll see. And there are a lot of specialized design and simulation tools for different kinds of robots. So we'll take you through all this today. and show you how to connect to the hardware and do the deployment aspect also. So I just want to show you a little bit more about mobile robotics. So today we are not covering every kind of generic robotic. We're not robots. We're not covering manipulators, for example. We are looking at something that is like the top left-hand corner in the screen. So that's an autonomous robotic car driving around in our offices in Natick. And this car is trying to make a map of the environment and just figure out how to drive somewhere. The picture below that, this one on the lower left-hand side, again, this robot with a camera mounted on it is driving around in the office, and it's basically making a 3D map of the entire environment and trying to figure out how to navigate. And on the right side, you can see this robot has some kind of, I think this is a deep learning network. So it's perceiving, it's understanding the signs in the environment, and it's able to understand what these little images coming in through its cameras means. So today's topic will center around these kinds of applications, which apply to mobile robots. Let me show you a really nice example of where we can get to after we master all this. So this is a robot made by the German Aerospace Center. It's called Justin, and it has 53 different joints. It has cameras with which it can see things, and it's able to carry out very, very complex actions. So basically, a guy tosses the ball to the robot. The robot is able to perceive that, and it's able to catch the ball as well as return the ball catch. I mean, catching two balls at the same time is kind of a complex task because you have to have grips. You have to see the path of the ball. You have to plan out the trajectory, etc., etc. So you can see they have been using model-based design in the German Aerospace Center, and they can implement this kind of complex functionality in a matter of hours. So we'll look at how to do that. I'm just going to skip this one because we've spent a long time on intros. A little bit about me, just so you know what my background is. So I also used to work in robotics. This was my test rig. So I used to work on a robot arm like this with a camera attached on the end. And we would come in and scan different industrial objects from various sites. And the idea was that we could make a precise 3D scan of some kind of object without having to touch it. So this was an application which was being used in the medical industry as well as the aerospace industry. So I worked both in open source software and MATLAB, and I think that a combination of both of them is very powerful. So today we'll be showing you how the model-based design aspect of this works and how you can plan out your robot operations and then how you can implement these things in real hardware. So I used to keep a test piece on a bench, and then I used to move a robot all around, take pictures. And then I used to use OpenCV to stitch the image together, make a depth map, and then you could come up with a precise scan of the object using that. So this is the same kind of stuff that they use for doing surgeries remotely. It's the same kind of stuff they use for navigation as well. So I have a little bit of experience here, which I hope I can share with you today. Okay, so I hope all that sounds interesting. I can see most people have joined by now. So we can start moving towards the hands-on examples. Just one thing I'll let you know before we go to the hands-on part. If you're from the Kerala DTE institutes, maybe one of my colleagues can add more information. You will have access to the MATLAB campus-wide license. So all students, faculty, and researchers get unlimited access to MATLAB, Simulink, and all toolboxes. And you can install it in your university machines as well as your personal machines. So if you're from one of the supported institutes in Kerala, you will already have access to all these tools. All you need to go is go to mathworks.com, log in with your official email ID, and you can download anything that you like. Okay, so just thought I'd let you know that. Right, but let's now start off with an introduction to modeling and simulation. So just to give you an outline, what we're going to do is we're going to see how to model a DC motor, how to control that motor. Then we're going to see how to put it in a robot and how to move a robot around. And then we're going to look at some navigation algorithms and some path planning algorithms. And then at the end, we'll see different kinds of models and then how to generate ROS nodes. So it's a complete end-to-end workflow for you to get started off with. All right. So the first thing here, If I remember the survey right, all of you said, or most of you said that you know ordinary differential equations. So what I want to show you first is, just as an introduction, we'll open up Simulink and we'll create a model of a very simple DC motor. So this is a DC motor, it's an electromechanical system, and you supply a little bit of voltage to this, and it is able to turn some actuator, which could be a wheel, which could be a joint on a robot, which could be some other mechanism. So the idea is that we can, because we have an understanding of the mathematics of this motor, we are going to take these equations and we're going to take them into Simulink, and we're going to build a model of this motor such that we can simulate it. That's going to be the first step. Once we know how to model certain kinds of mathematics inside the Simulink environment and we know how to develop a controller for it, then we'll see how to use that for robotics. Okay, so just to give you a little bit of background, I hope you've all seen these kinds of equations before. So there are two equations that govern a DC motor. The first equation defines the relationship between the electrical components. So V, which is voltage, equals K omega, which is motor constant times the speed, plus IR, which is current times resistance, plus LdI by dt, which is the inductance times the rate of change of current. Now, if we rearrange this equation in this format, we can get the value of current I in the form of an integral equation. I mean, this is a first order differential equation. If you solve this using an integral, you can find out how much current is flowing in your motor given the current state. And then the second part of the circuit, or the second part of the maths behind a DC motor, is the mechanical circuit. So this equation is J d omega by dt, which is moment of inertia times the rate of change of angular acceleration, equals Ki, which is the motor constant times the current, minus B omega, which is the friction times the angular velocity, minus some external torque. So in the electrical circuit, you put in some energy in the form of voltage, and then it is dissipated in turning the motor in the resistance and in the inductor. And in the mechanical part of the circuit, you get energy in the machine through the current turning the coils, and this energy is dissipated with the friction and in countering the external load. So this is a pair of coupled first order differential equations, and if we can solve this inside simulation, then we can develop a mathematical model and we can see how to control that model as well. So we've just picked this as a first example just to show you what the interface looks like and how to work with equations. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to open up MATLAB. You would need to install MATLAB if you don't already have it. I'll just clear all the stuff. So the MATLAB interface looks something like this. Most of you said you've seen it. I'm using the latest version, 2020B, because it comes with a lot of additional features. Here's the command window. You can type commands here, and the results get saved in the workspace. And over here, you have your folder structure where you can navigate to the correct sort of files. So I'm not going to start off in MATLAB. I'm actually going to go to the Home tab. And from the top here, there is this button, which is called Simulink. So in MATLAB, you write line by line code, basically. In Simulink, you can use block diagrams for programming, which is very useful for systems engineering. So I'm going to click on Simulink, and this is going to open up the start page. There is a question, can't we use online MATLAB? You can. Simulink is also supported on MATLAB Online now. It will just run a little bit slower, and the code generation doesn't work properly online. So if you want to work with hardware, then it's better if you have it installed. Everything else, I think, will work. Okay, so the way Simulink works is there is a blank canvas, and what you need to do is you need to drag and drop certain blocks into this canvas, and when you hit play, this play button in the simulation, it will compute the results of all those blocks in real time. So there's a whole bunch of blocks in the library browser. I'll just click on this button here to open that. And you'll see these blocks are basically just mathematical operations. And you can just connect the signals together to try and do some computation. And here it comes up. So inside the library browser, you can see, first of all, on the left-hand side, all the sub-libraries of Simulink are there, and all the toolboxes are there as well. Okay. So the basic library of Simulink has some basic blocks for doing your mathematics. More advanced libraries tend to have more advanced functions. So you can see we have a dedicated library for robotics systems. We have libraries for robotics playground and mobile robotics. I'll tell you where to download these. These are extra libraries. We have a library for ROS. We have a library for Simscape. And there's a special library for the UAV toolbox, etc., etc. So there's a whole bunch of useful stuff in here, which you can get started with once you understand it. And we'll also use the navigation toolbox today. So just keeping it simple at the beginning. The first thing to understand is that in Simulink, you have these blocks. And each block will have an input or an output arrow or both of them. So you put some signal into the input arrow. The block does a certain mathematical computation, and then you can get the result from the output arrow. So for example, if I go to sources, this library down here, and I go to a sine wave block, I can just drag and drop this here. So this sine wave block appears. I can take the signal from it, and I can put it into a scope block. So scope is just like an oscilloscope. When I run the simulation, the output of the sine wave will be plotted in the scope block. So if I double click on it, it will just open up the block. And you can see a sine wave there. You can see the amplitude is 1, and it runs from 0 to 10 seconds. So everything inside Simulink runs in the time domain. You have to start at some time, and then it stops at some time. It's not like MATLAB code where it runs line by line. This simulation will actually be a bunch of time steps, which will always run from one start time to one stop time. Now, suppose I just want to perform some operation here. Let's say I want to perform a doubling operation. I can get a gain block. I can say I want to multiply my sine wave by 2 times. And I put this in the middle. So I'm getting a sine wave. I'm multiplying it by 2, and then I'm plotting the result. So it will give me the same shape, but it will double the amplitude. You'll see this 1 becomes 2 here. When I run the simulation, the model compiles, and you can see the amplitude of the sine wave has doubled. Okay, so this is a very, very simple model. In the same way, what you can do is you can also, if you look at the continuous library, you can get the derivative, you can get the integration, you can put in state space models, transfer functions, transport delays. You can have a whole bunch of mathematical operations here. So additions, absolute value, divisions, matrix multiplications, mathematical functions. It's all here. All you have to do is connect up these blocks, and it will be able to model some differential equations. Okay. Are there any questions so far? So there's a question, is it possible to stop the simulation by putting some stop condition? Yeah. I think it's in, let me find where it is. Yeah, so inside the sinks library, there is the stop simulation button. If you put in a condition true here, which is basically a positive signal, it will end the simulation. Okay, so you can do that. I am not able to see any more questions, so I'll just carry on. Okay. So now what I'm going to do is, just ignore this Word document. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take this set of equations, and I'm going to model this inside Simulink. So I'll copy this picture. This is just an image. And I'm just going to paste this here in Simulink. If this works. I think I have to have it saved on my machine, so just a second. So I have this equation saved as an image file, so I'm just putting it here. Now what I'm going to do in the next 5 minutes or so is I'm going to take these two equations where there's an integrator, and I'm going to create a mathematical model of these inside Simulink. Okay. Don't worry if you're a little bit confused on why we're doing this. As we go along the presentation, all this will start to make sense. And you'll see how once we have a model, we can control it, and then we can do various things with that model. Okay. So what I need to do here, if I want to calculate the current inside a DC motor at any time, I need to have all these quantities. I need to add them or subtract them. I need to multiply the whole thing by L, which is a constant. And then I need to integrate this in order to get the value of current. Then I can feed this into this equation down here, which will tell me how fast the motor is spinning. So if I know the voltage, I know the resistance, the motor constant, and the inductance, I can use that to calculate the current. And from the current in the motor, I can figure out how fast it's going to spin. So where do I start? The first thing is there are two integrations here. So I'll start out with an integrator block. Now in the modern version of Simulink, you can just double click anywhere and type what you need. So I'll just type integrator. So I have this integrator block, which is this mathematical function here. And whatever signal I put in on this side, it will just integrate that value and give me the solution. So I know the solution to this integrator is my current I. I can double click on any signal and just label it. What I have to do just before integrating this is multiply this entire expression by 1 over L. So let me get a gain block.
Dhruv, is it possible to zoom in a little bit?
Yeah.
Thanks.
Is that better?
Much better, thank you.
Okay, thanks. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I have to put the value of 1 over L here. And what I can do is I can declare some variable values inside my MATLAB script or inside MATLAB, and those variables will be pulled into Simulink automatically. So either I can hard code the value here, or I can enter it through MATLAB. So if I go back to my presentation slides, oh, I didn't actually put the value here. Okay, let me go to my MATLAB script. I have a MATLAB script which has values for a real DC motor here. Okay, so we have the same equations. These are certain values for my DC motor. So I have some inertia, viscous friction, motor constant, resistance, inductance. All these values are already supplied from some data sheet. So all I have to do is execute this piece of MATLAB code. This is a live script file, by the way, if you're wondering why it looks different. So in a live script in MATLAB, you can have text and titles and all sorts of controls, etc., and equations along with the code. So I've just run this section of code. And inside my workspace, you can see I have all these variables, and the values of these variables are declared. So I can use these variables directly in Simulink now. So if I go back to Simulink, in the gain block, I can just write 1 over L. And Simulink will pull this value from my MATLAB. Now what I need to do is I need to multiply this expression V minus K omega minus IR times 1 over L and then integrate it. So there are three terms here, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get a sum block. A sum block is just an adder. And then I'll double click on it. So let me make the shape of this rectangular. And I can put in the list of signs as plus, minus, minus. Same as what we're doing here. So plus V minus K omega minus IR. Okay. And we can resize the block a little bit, and we can pass this here. So now first thing I need to do is put in some voltage signal. So let me first get in a constant voltage value. let's say I put in 12 volts and I feed this as my voltage. So this is the value of voltage. Okay. Next, what I need to do is I need to have this term minus k omega. So I have not yet defined my omega, but I'll get it from some equation in the bottom. So let me just leave a loose connection here. Whatever is my omega term, when I calculate it, I will take the value and I will multiply a gain of k to that value, and then I'll feed it into this block. So if you press Control I, it changes the direction. So once I have the value of k, I'll just take it from my model and I'll feed it into this. And the other thing I have to do is I have to take the value of current, multiply it by resistance, and then subtract it in the same block. So if I right click and drag, this just replicates this block. I can change the titles if I want. So I'm going to take the value of my current, multiply it by R, which is the resistance, and subtract it here. So this is my electrical part of the circuit, and this is now complete. So these series of blocks are actually defining this equation here. This integrator is taking these three expressions, dividing them by 1 over L, and then integrating with respect to time. That's going to give me my value of current. I hope this is making sense. You'll certainly see the sense in the results when they come out. Now for my omega block, so I need to calculate this term omega now. This is the angular velocity. This is how fast my motor is turning. Again, I need to do something similar. I need to have a 1 over j term, and I need to subtract three values, and I need to integrate this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take all these things, copy the entire thing below, and I can change the sign. So in this case, oh, they're plus, minus, minus again. So even the signs are the same. And whatever is coming out of my integrator the second time is going to be the value of my omega. Instead of L, we divide by J over here. I hope all of you are not getting bored. If you are, I can move a bit faster as well. I'm just trying to make sure we understand how these blocks work. We need to get the value of I, multiply it by K, and then add it here. So I take the value of I, multiply it by K, and then add it here. I have to take my spinning omega, multiply the friction coefficient B, and subtract it. So I take this value, I multiply B, which is friction, and then I subtract it from the spinning of my system. And the final thing is I have to put in some external torque. So for now, let me just say my external torque is 0. I can set a 0 constant value. Later on, we'll see how this is used. Okay, so now I have complete solution to this system of equations. I don't have to worry about how these equations are going to be solved. Simulink has built-in solvers that will take care of the whole thing. All I need to do is look at the results. So I can get a scope block, and then I can put in two inputs, and then I can get the value of current and angular velocity inside my motor, like so. And when I run the simulation, this will let me know that if I have this kind of motor with this much resistance, this much inductance, this motor constant, and I supply 12 volts, how is that motor going to behave? So inside the simulation, without even having a real piece of hardware, the simulation will tell us how fast that motor is going to spin. So in this scope, I can enable the legend, and I can separate out the two different scopes that I have. So I can see that my current rises to around 12 amps because my resistance is quite low, it's only 1 ohm. And I can see that my motor speed slowly rises up and starts spinning at around 1.2 radians per second. Okay, so it's quite clear how my system is behaving. If I have a motor, I supply it with some voltage, this is how fast it's going to move. If I know how fast it's going to move, I can integrate the signal again and get the position out. So now let's see something more interesting. This is quite basic. Now let me, instead of putting in a zero torque value, let me put in some value of additional torque. By the way, one thing is, suppose that I want my motor to spin at a constant speed, I can just adjust the value of voltage, right? So if I want this motor to spin at 15 or 1.5 radians per second, all I have to do is supply more voltage, and then I run my simulation, and it will start spinning at 1.5 because this is a direct ratio here. Or I can adjust the motor constant, or I can adjust the resistance, etc. I can change the parameters, I can see the response. Now what I'm going to do is, instead of a constant torque, I'm going to go to the library browser, and in the sources, I'm going to get this step signal. This is a step signal. So this means my system was running nice and smoothly. Now suddenly I add a step resistance to it. So imagine this motor is driving a robot which is rolling around the ground. Suddenly it hits a step, and there is some input torque which is resisting my motor. What is going to happen to my speed? Right, my speed is going to fall. So let me try to simulate that once. I'll put the step time as 6 seconds, and I'll put the value as 1 e to the minus 1, which is 0.1 Newton meter. You can see I am subtracting this term because this is external load. This is going to act against my system. It's going to slow my system down. So when I simulate the system, we see something interesting happening here. My current rises to the correct value, it stays there. But my motor, which was spinning happily enough before, as soon as it encounters some resistance, the speed just drops off. Okay, this is a problem because I want my system to move at a certain speed. I want it to move in a certain way, but this system is not able to reject whatever is coming in from the outside. In control theory, we sometimes call this a disturbance. In this case, it's actually more like an input, but it's the same concept. So the idea is that when our system meets some external barrier or external resistance, we should be able to compensate in some way in order to overcome this. And that's where the control systems come into the picture. So what I can do now is I can very quickly show you how to make a closed loop feedback controller for this kind of system, such that we can set a demand speed. We can, instead of setting voltage, we can specify how fast I want my motor to spin. And then I can directly control how fast my system should be moving. So in order to do that, let me drag this here. So I put all of this inside one system. I'm just clicking and dragging to make this colored area. I right click and I call this create subsystem from selection. So all the mathematics, all the complexity here is just going to disappear, and it's going to become a single block. Okay, so now this is like a closed system. This is like one of the motors you bought off the shelf in the marketplace. So this is a system which you cannot open up. You cannot redesign this anymore unless you want to go inside it. And you can see this system is just taking in some voltage input. I can go and modify the name of this. It's taking in some torque input. The output is current and angular velocity. I actually don't even need to measure the current in my system because I don't really care. I only care about how fast my motor is spinning. So I can rename these input-output ports, which appear automatically, and I can just keep the ones that I need. So now this is a very much more simplified model, right? Because all the complexity has disappeared inside that subsystem, and this is what we call as a DC motor plant model. So plant is something that comes from chemical engineering because the concepts of control theory were developed initially for chemical plants. So this block here, this subsystem here contains all the dynamic information of what is going to happen when I feed in some voltage and some torque. And without having to go in and see all this complexity all the time, I can just simulate the inputs and outputs and see what the result looks like. Okay, so if I hit the run button, I get exactly the same result, except of course I'm not measuring the current anymore. So this is just blank. So suppose this DC motor is driving the wheels of my robot. I want my robot to move at a certain speed. Okay, so I can maybe create some annotation here. My problem statement is that I want my motor to move at or spin at let's say 2 radians per second. That is my problem statement. I'm an engineer. I have the motor which is going inside my robot, which is turning the wheels. And I just want this to spin at 2 radians per second. I don't care how much voltage it takes. I don't care what resistance it encounters. I just want it to keep on spinning. So what we can do in this case is we go to the continuous library. I'm going to show you one kind of control algorithm. Inside the continuous library, we have this PID integrator block. This stands for proportional integral derivative. And this is one of the most common control designs that you will see in industry. There are more advanced ones out there. Someone mentioned model predictive control, etc. But if you can understand this, then this is the first step to understanding the more complex ones as well. And we'll see what this does. So if you're interested in model predictive control, there's a separate toolbox for that. And you can use one of these blocks from inside here. I think my colleague will be able to post a documentation link to that. So how to use this one. But the basic underlying concept is quite similar. So for a feedback controller to work, what we have to do is we have to define a demand signal. So I'll say I want my motor to spin constantly at 2 radians per second. I'll call this radians per second. And this is my velocity demand signal. Now, the way we design a feedback controller is we take the measured value. So this is my velocity measurement. And we subtract the measurement from the demand signal. Okay, so we use something like a sum block. I hope many of you have seen these kinds of block diagrams in your control systems classes or your electrical engineering classes. So we have this block with a plus and a minus sign, and we subtract the measurement from the demand signal. Okay. Sometimes you also have some sensor dynamics in here. So you can have let's say a different kind of subsystem in here with some sensor dynamics, but we're just ignoring that for now. And then what we're going to do is, once we subtract the demand and the measurement signal, let me just put this right here so it's very clear. Once we subtract the measurement from the demand, we get this error signal E. And we feed this into the PID controller or any controller that you have. And the idea is that the controller can measure the error between the demand and the measurement. And based on that, it will automatically adjust how much voltage to feed into your motor. And that will allow your motor to spin at a constant speed that you have specified. Why do we need all this? We'll get to that. I'll show you why we are doing all this exercise when we get to the next example. But for now, I hope this will help in understanding PID control. Okay, so what happens inside my PID control? Actually, let me just show you without this block. I can make the controller by myself. So PID stands for proportional integral derivative. So the idea is that I basically take uh, my error signal, I multiply it by something, and then I feed that as an input to my motor controller board, which sets the voltage. So suppose I just take the error and feed that directly into the voltage. So the greater the error there is between the measurements, the more voltage will be fed into this block here. And the ratio of this error to the voltage is 1 right now. So let's see what happens. The top part of the scope is having my demand signal. The bottom one is having the measurement signal. Let's see what happens. I'll just change the layout a little bit to make it a little more readable after this. Let me change the layout so it will be easier to understand. Okay, I hope these axes are visible. So what's happening right now is that my velocity demand is sitting at a constant 2 radians per second. As soon as my system starts up, the motor starts to spin, but it doesn't get very far. It spins at some low value, and then as soon as the reverse torque step is applied, it drops into actually negative territory. So the reverse torque is so powerful, it makes my motor spin backwards. So basically, I need a stronger controller here. I need to have a higher ratio such that the speed goes to a much higher value and it can catch up to the demand. Okay, so this is called proportional gain. This is the P part of PID. So let me make this 10 times higher in the gain function. For those of you who have done control theory, I hope you're appreciating why Simulink is so commonly used. It makes working like this so much easier. So I multiply that error value by 10, and I can see it looks a little better now. So it's not going negative, and it's also catching up a little bit to the velocity demand, but it's not quite there. And after this other disturbance happens, it's also not able to recover from this. So we'll figure out how to cure that problem. Okay. Let me show you one thing. Any idea why this signal doesn't look smooth or why it looks spiky? Can anyone mention in the chat window? This doesn't look like a normal signal, right? It's not a smooth signal. Any idea? Time steps? Perfect. Perfect. Excellent. So basically, the way Simulink works is that there are a bunch of built-in solvers. ODs are not integrated by magic. There's actually some very nice mathematics going on behind the scenes, which enables this integrator to add up the different values at different time steps. Now the thing about time steps is the more time steps you have, the more calculations you have to do. So inside Simulink, we have these variable step solvers which solve a problem very efficiently using large time steps. So if we want to have a smoother response signal, we can actually go and change our time step. I'll just show you how large the time steps are here. So you can see while the system is smooth, there's a moderate distance in the time steps. Here we have a little bit more clustering where it's changing sharply, but you can see the behavior is not being captured fully. Okay, so I'll go to my modeling tab on the top into this gear icon, which is the model settings. And inside the solver selection, by default, it uses this OD45 solver, which is a fourth and a fifth order solver together. Fourth order is Rangekata, fifth order, I'm not sure what it's called. It uses both of them together and tries to figure out the best optimum time set for minimizing the error and maximizing the computational efficiency. You can see which one is being used down here. So there's a lot of built-in solvers. There are special solvers for your stiff equations. which are tricky to solve. And there's a special solver for Simscape as well. I'll tell you what Simscape means. So I can I can put my maximum step size 0.1 here. This means there will be a solution generated at least at 10 hertz. If you're from a signal processing or control theory background, you know that there's that Nyquist limit. So if you want to control any system or you want to measure any system, you have to make sure that you're sampling at something like twice the frequency. And it's safer to sample at 20 times the frequency, actually. I'm just going to change this for 0.1 for now. When I run this again, you'll see there are a lot more points, and this is captured much more smoothly. And I can keep on improving this if I want to. So this is a point of confusion. That's why I just thought I'd mention it here. Many people get stuck on this step, but we don't need to linger too much over it. Let me make this even smaller, actually. Okay. So basically, the step that I did in adjusting my proportional gain improved things, but it's not solved my problem. So what I can do is I can go and improve this a bit more. I can put it to 20. I can try this again. It gets closer. I can go and set this to, let's say, even 50 if I want. It gets even closer. It's almost reaching the right value now. It's almost recovering from this as well. Let me double that again. We're going to very high gain values now. I set my proportional gain to 100. And now you can see my velocity measurement actually catches up to my demand, but it overshoots. It oscillates for a little bit, and then it settles down at some value which is lower than the demand signal. And the same thing here. So my gain is high enough, but there is this steady state error, basically. There is this error which my controller can never conquer. This is a problem with proportional gain. If you have a steady state error, this will never close the distance completely. So what we do is a very clever solution. We basically take this error signal. It's the same signal that we have here. We integrate this over time, so the value will keep on increasing. And then it should be able to catch up to my signal here. So what do? I take my error signal, I integrate it. How do I integrate? There's a built-in integrator. Let me rearrange this model a little bit. So I integrate this signal. I may want to put another gain on this. And then I add this here. So maybe I can just put a gain of 1 right now. This thing here is called my integral gain. This thing here is called my proportional gain. So what we have now is a PI controller. So I hit play. This integral is not doing much. So maybe I need to improve this or increase this. Okay, now it's trying to catch up. You can see this line is closing the distance. It's still not strong enough. I put this to 100. Okay, this is interesting. So now my signal has actually caught up to the velocity demand. It still overshoots and oscillates a little bit, but it is able to eliminate the error. And the interesting thing is, even if I put in a step torque disturbance from outside, my system is still able to catch up and keep my motor moving at the right value. Okay, so this is a very nice step. But there's still this oscillation there. So what I can do is I can look a little bit ahead in the future by seeing the slope of this curve. And from that, I can remove the oscillation a little bit. So that's called the D part. That's the derivative. PID, the full thing is not so commonly used, but you can use it if you want. So maybe I'll take a small derivative gain as well. I'll put in maybe a value of 10 should be enough. And I'll run this again. So tuning the gains on this PID blocks is actually quite an art form. And you can see I've got a very nice solution there. Okay, so I put in a demand signal, my system immediately catches up. There is some disturbance on the outside, doesn't matter, my system is able to respond and it's able to get to the right path. Okay. The interesting thing is you can do all of this stuff in one step without having to experiment around so much. So if I delete all of this and I just use the inbuilt PID block, I've shown you all of this, by the way, just so you understand what's going on. It's not magic behind the scenes. It's just people making these blocks to make your life easier. If you're a teacher, you can teach first and then allow your students to use the PID gains, etc. So this PID block contains all these gains directly in one window. I can put in the values here. I can put in my derivative value. There's also automatic filtering here. You can put in initial values. You can saturate the output by limiting the response size. So basically, it allows you a lot more control. And there's also an auto tuning facility built in, which is quite good for robotics. So this will automatically linearize your plant model and work out the best gains for your system. This is just for your information because this is very, very popular, and it's one of the central reasons why Simulink is used in control systems design. So if I click on tune, this automatic PID tuner app opens up, and basically it's just going to show me the block and the calculated response time. So right now my block is responding like this. That's a dashed line. And what this controller is calculating is if I use this new line here, that will be a better response. I can make this faster or more robust by sliding these things on the top. And I can compare the two designs. So I can see the gains. I can see the rise time. Rise time is how fast it takes to get to this value. I can see the settling time. I can see the overshoot, gain margin, figure out how to work with your PID controllers. And then when I run this, my controller will respond maybe just a little bit more nicely. So that's a very, very nice response. Sorry, there's something weird going on with my window here. Oh, I think my step size was too small, so it's not logging all the points. So you have to change a few options if you go too small. That's okay. I think I have to change a certain property to limit these data points. And then it will capture the whole simulation. Okay, so this is some very nice gains that we're seeing here. Our system responds in under a second and it moves to the right sort of velocity value. Okay, so that was quite a detailed overview of modeling, simulation, and PID control. We've taken about an hour now. The reason I wanted to take you through all this is once you've designed your PID controller, what you can do is you can deploy this directly into hardware as well. So if I go into model settings, there is something called hardware implementation here. There's a tab, and you can directly select any board that you like. So suppose that I was working with a controller and I wanted to go on a particular robot. Well, I can just click ROS or ROS2, and it will be able to generate a ROS node and deploy this controller directly onto that robot model. So you can use the power of mathematical modeling and simulation here. You can create a controller, and then you can deploy it using ROS onto the hardware that you want. Another thing you can do in MATLAB is, this is MATLAB again. So if you go into this add-ons tab at the top, you can go to get hardware support packages. This is very, very interesting. And there you can see you can work with all sorts of commonly available low-cost hardware as well as professional level hardware. So you can see we have support packages for Arduino, both for MATLAB and Simulink, for Raspberry Pi, for Parrot mini drones, for Texas Instruments cards, Then we have here Android devices. This is a PX for autopilot for UAVs. There's a special robotics thing as well, which I wanted to show you. Yeah. So if you're working with Lego Mindstorm robots, there's a support package for that. And there's a couple more. I think they've changed the order in which this is listed. So if you're working on BeagleBone, or if you're working on Arduino Engineering Kit, or any of those commonly used hardwares, basically you don't need to write C or C++ code. You can just make a Simulink model, and the code is automatically compiled by Simulink, and it's actually a very efficient solver. So this is the same method I used in my own master's and PhD thesis research, and I just thought I'd mention that to you. Okay. So far what we've seen is we've seen how to use Simulink, how to build these blocks, what a scope is, what a signal is, how do we connect this together, how do we design a controller, and a little bit about how we deploy to hardware. What I'd like to do now is take a 5-minute break, and then we'll show you how all this connects to mobile robotics and all those fancy robotics applications that we saw above. I see a question, is code generation for Python supported? It depends on how you set it up. So basically it generates a ROS node which can go inside any typical device. If you're working on a simulator like Gazebo, which is Python based, it will be able to work with that as well. So we can set up that application. If there are any more questions, just put it in the chat. I'll be back in a minute. Okay, so we've got a couple of questions. I'll answer them straight away just to save time, because we are running a little bit behind time. In the motor control block set, which is a new one, there are a lot of inbuilt models for more complex motors. So this was a very simple model that we built. If I go to the motor control block set, you can see inside electrical systems and inside motors, you have the induction motor, you have an interior permanent magnet motor, as well as a surface mount one. And inside the Simscape electrical toolboxes, I think we have a lot more advanced components as well as the controllers for all of these. So I believe it is inside Simscape electrical, then electromechanical. We have asynchronous motors, brushed motors, permanent magnet, stepper motors, synchronous motors, etc. So all of these models are provided with MathWorks. I mean, this is really our specialty and what we do. So if you look in the documentation, you'll find it.
Hello, Dhruv.
Yeah.
Right. So there is a question on whether it is possible to create electronic circuit using Simscape. On a similar line, I just wanted to ask a question. Is it possible for me to work with electronic components to make the motor that you made using equations?
Yes, thanks. So that's a perfect segue. I was not planning to cover this today, but I'll show you because the question has been asked. So inside Simscape, which is another tool we'll talk about, in the foundation library, we have a list of all these different kinds of domains. So you can see electrical, gas, hydraulic, pneumatics, mechanical systems, etc. If we go into the electrical library and see the electrical elements, you can see these blocks are available inside Simscape for doing the electrical modeling aspect as well. So you can see you have capacitors, diodes, inductors, etc., etc. These are the basic blocks. And inside Simscape electrical, which is an advanced library, you have a lot more advanced blocks for your circuit design aspects as well, and semiconductors. So this is a very powerful tool for doing system level design, and you can integrate the electrical and the mechanical and the pneumatic, hydraulics, all these parts together, and you can build very complex system level models as well. We have a question. Can we import? Sorry, Akhil, do you want to add anything there, or does that cover it?
No, I believe that covers it. Just to add one small point, using Simscape components, you may not have to write equations. Simscape takes care of all the equations, non-idealities, and other parameters into consideration as and when required and set by you. For example, if you're creating a motor and you want to study the thermal effects of when the motor is running, you can actually set up systems to understand that as well. Thanks, Dhruv.
Thanks. Yeah, so what I'm showing on my screen right now, so this is what Simscape models look like. You can see it basically looks like an electrical circuit, and this is a mechanical circuit. So the same thing that we did with mathematics, you can also do it with this kind of physical models. You just take the resistance, inductance, motor, and then here is your torque source, your damper, and your inertia. So all the same things that we did. If you don't even want to solve the ODEs, Simscape will handle all the mathematics for you as well. Okay. There was another question, can we import URDF models to Simscape? Yes, you can. So there is something known as Simscape multibody, which I was planning to show. I can mention that now. If I look in the documentation of Simscape multibody, this is a tool which is used for creating 3D environments and fairly high fidelity simulations. So if you have some kind of a robot model which is built using the URDF system, or it's built in SolidWorks, you can import it in basically just like a one line of code called SM import, and you can import the URDF file into Simscape. So if you go into the documentation, there are already examples given for this one. There's an example of a humanoid robot and a robot manipulator as well. So you can try that out. Okay, I hope people are back now, because we do have to carry on to get to our main agenda, which is mobile robotics. Are there any last minute questions? Okay, I think we're fine for now. I hope you're back, and apologies about the background noise. It really is not in my control. There's a question, is it possible to connect two different subsystems like electrical and hydraulics in Simscape? Yes, that is exactly what it is designed for. If I have time, I'll try to show you. But I want to cover this part first. So maybe Akhil, you can share a link to that Simscape documentation. They can see all the examples there. Okay, so what we've done so far is basically we've seen how to model and simulate something. We've looked at PID controls. I showed you the hardware support packages. But the important question in your mind should be that, why are we doing all this? Like, I just set a demand signal for my motor for a mobile robot. Where did this demand signal come from? How is this related to robotics, right? The basic idea is that if you can work out the kinematics of a robot, which is a relatively much easier task, you can use that as the demand signal, and then you can drive the robot according to that. So I'll show you how that works next. Imagine this kind of application for mobile robotics. So this is a differential drive robot, which is disc shaped. So it's a circular body and it has two wheels. Okay. Now both of these wheels spin at independent values omega L and omega R, which can be controlled using a motor. Now, as you can see, if both of these wheels are spinning in the same direction, my robot is going to move forward at some velocity v. If there's a difference in the speed at which these wheels spin, it is obviously going to cause some rotation motion, right? Because one side is spinning faster than the other side. So it is going to move as well as it's going to turn. And this is the kind of thing that you need to do for mobile robotics. So this is a differential drive robot. And the idea is that if you know how fast you have to move or in what direction you have to go, you can work out backwards from that how fast each of these wheels should be turning. So if you know the speed of both of these wheels and you figure out the velocity and position from that, that is called forward kinematics. And if you do the reverse operation, if you calculate from the target to what your speed should be, that is known as inverse kinematics. And both of these can be done very, very easily for a simple system like this one. Okay, does this make sense, this concept here? If you could write yes, no in the chat, please. Yeah, so now do you understand why we were doing all that modeling, simulation, velocity control, blah, blah, right? I hope it makes sense now. So let's consider this robot in specifically. This is an example inside the mobile robotics simulation toolbox, which is an add-on. So I'll paste this link in the chat as well. So I have put the link in the chat, and I'm just going to open it directly without spending too much time on it, because we have a lot of content to cover. So once you install the mobile robotics toolbox and you open it up, not going to cover those steps now. You can follow it. It's on Git. Basically, there's a whole bunch of models in here for 2D robot geometries for differential drive 3 or 4-wheeled vehicles, including forward and inverse kinematics. Let me try and make the screen a little bit bigger. There is also configurable LiDAR. LiDAR is laser range detection and sensing, and object detection simulators built into this toolbox. You can visualize your robot vehicles and the sensors inside some grid maps. So a map is like a place you're driving around in. And all of these examples are provided inside this toolbox link that we just sent. So let me open up the first example, which is differential drive. Okay. You can see this is a MATLAB live script. This is not an HTML document. It's a MATLAB script, and you can, if you go to new and then live script, you can make these documents which have both the text and the images and the equations all in the same window. So now what is going to happen in the case of this robot is the forward and inverse kinematics are very, very simple here. Okay. So if you want to work out the forward kinematics of this robot, let's say the radius of the wheel is r. Let's say this one is spinning at omega r, this one is spinning at omega l. So you add up both of these velocities multiplied by the radius, and you take the average of them, and that will give you what the forward velocity is. Very, very easy stuff, right? And if you want to find out how fast it is spinning, you basically take the difference of both of these, multiply by radius, and divide by the length between the wheels. So that's forward kinematics. If you understand how fast these wheels are spinning, you know what the radius and the length between them is. In basically a couple of simple equations, you can work out how fast this robot is spinning and how fast it's moving forward. Now, working out the inverse kinematics is also relatively easy in this example. Suppose I want my robot to move at a certain speed and spin at a certain angular velocity. So that's the orange part. I can just invert these equations and I can work it out backwards. So my omega L should be 1 by r times v minus omega L by 2. And my omega r should be 1 by r v plus omega L by 2. That's it. Now, if you have these two equations, you can basically work out anything else, right? So in my MATLAB script, I'm just defining my wheel radius and wheelbase. I can solve the forward kinematics problem or the inverse kinematics problem section by section. All the functions are given here. If you want to actually write out these equations in MATLAB code, that's just one line of code. I'm not going to cover that right now. What I want to show you is a model in Simulink that implements this. So there is a Simulink model for doing all of this. It opened up quickly this time. So what is here in this model is we are going to supply the linear velocity of the robot using this slider. We are going to supply the angular velocity of the robot with this slider here. This block here is going to work out the inverse kinematics. So this block is a subsystem. If I click on it, you can see there's a MATLAB function inside. And what is this MATLAB function doing? It's calling the same MATLAB code that was inside my toolbox. So basically, if you have any MATLAB functions, you can call them inside Simulink just by using a MATLAB function custom block. So to do that, you go to library browser, you go to Simulink, user-defined functions, and you can call a MATLAB function from inside Simulink itself. Okay. Otherwise, you can also manually do all the mathematics. It's quite easy here. Now, from this, you can figure out what my individual wheel speed should be. Then I supply the speed into my simulation model. So this is my speed demand. If I want, I can put a controller on it, or I can just take it as it is. And then from that, I can calculate the position of my robot. So it's actually easier for me just to show you how this works rather than talk about it. So let me do that instead. So when I run the Simulink model, you can see this little robot is driving around. First, let me bring it to a stop. So I'll bring the linear velocity to 0. You'll see the robot almost stops, but it keeps on turning with some angular velocity. Maybe if I wanted to turn in a positive direction, I can change that value. If I wanted to move faster, I can increase the speed from here. And this is just plotting out the robot as it's moving. If I wanted to change directions, I can steer it with this slider. It seems to have vanished. I can bring the robot to a stop, etc., etc., and I can drive it in reverse if I want. Okay, so once you know how to work out the kinematics, it's actually relatively easy to create a simulation model like this. And we've already seen the step that lies underneath this, because I can work out from my velocity targets how fast I want the wheels to turn, and then I can just put a PID controller to make sure the wheels are turning that fast. Does this make sense? Any questions? Okay, I think people are understanding what we're getting across, as far as I can see. So the basic idea is that you can use this simple geometric relationships to work out what the velocity should be. And then using your motor model and your control theory, you can actually make sure the wheels are spinning that fast. That's all. Okay, so this part is actually relatively simple, even though it sounds complicated. The next part is more interesting. Now, we know that if we want a robot to move in a certain way, we can do that. But how do we actually plan the path? How can we plan it properly? So what we can do in that case is we can supply a list of waypoints, and we can use something like a pure pursuit controller from the robotic systems toolbox. So let me open up the pure pursuit controller. What this does is, if I show you the documentation, it will describe it. What a pure pursuit controller does is, if you have this kind of robotic domain, and you want your robot to start from point 1, go to point 2, then point 3, then point 4, 5, 6, it will draw a bunch of straight lines between those paths. Okay. And what the pure pursuit controller does is, it has a certain look ahead distance. So it will look ahead at the path where it is supposed to go, and based on that, it will determine some intermediate velocity for the overall robot system. And then with one more step, which is the inverse kinematics, we can work out the individual velocities for each of the motors. Right? So we have these little pieces basically, and we're then trying to assemble them together into a larger system. So robotics is almost like building Lego in that way. You understand small pieces, and then you put them together, and something very complex and beautiful can emerge out of that one. So in the case of a pure pursuit controller, let's say that this is the path that I have to follow, this dashed line. My system looks ahead, and then basically it can steer according to the path. If you use a small look ahead distance, it will try to oscillate a lot to follow that quite closely. If you use a large look ahead, it will try to generate a very smooth curve to move smoothly from that position. So which one you should choose depends on your application. Because the small look ahead distance will capture the waypoints very carefully. The large one may just bypass the waypoint, but it will be a much smoother and much more efficient path. So you can determine, which algorithm you should use or how you should tune this algorithm depending on your application. There's a question if we need the torque calculation. So for that, we would have to go to a slightly higher fidelity model. We can get to that in a little bit as well. But the maths that we did, I mean, you can substitute torque control for velocity control. It will still work fine. So you can decide how much torque you need to counteract the external disturbance, and you can just apply that much. So that's also possible. Okay, so let me show you an example of this pure pursuit controller. Again, this is all in the mobile robotics toolbox. So we are going to open up this example, waypoint following using the pure pursuit algorithm for a differential drive robot. We open this up. I'm not going to go through this whole code line by line, but basically what we're doing is we're just defining the wheel radius and the wheel base. We are specifying a robot with a right and a left wheel. We are putting up some sample time. We are specifying the initial position here, and we are defining some waypoints. After that, this piece of code is going to create a visualizer. We define our controller here. We feed it the waypoints, we set the look ahead distance, and we can set the desired linear velocity and the maximum angular velocity. So in just a few lines of code, I mean, you can design quite a fairly sophisticated controller, and then you can simulate this over all of your time steps. So this is all in the toolbox, again, in the link that we shared. If you run this, it's easier just to see what's happening than it is to explain it, actually. So now that we have these waypoints, the robot is selecting that I'm going to drive along these points. If I'm going to drive along these points, I want to drive this fast. If I'm driving this fast, then I would naturally need to turn this much in order to reach the next waypoint. So it's able to do all these calculations, and then it's able to go from one point to the next point, to the next point, to the next, to the next, like this. So you supply the waypoints, the pure pursuit controller works out the path, the inverse kinematics works out the individual wheel speeds, and then your PID controller makes sure your robot is actually working at that speed. Okay, so you can see how all the different pieces are stacking up on top of each other, and you can have a differential drive robot which is driving from point to point like this. There's a question, can we add dynamics to this model? Yes, you can. I'll show you that. So this is a low fidelity model. We'll discuss high fidelity models as well. This is just for planning the path. We can also have much more complex models. All right. So now we have a path. But now imagine if we make it even one more step complex. We began from something very simple, how to control a motor. Now we saw how to control a path or how to make a path. But imagine we're getting more and more closer to the real world. In the real world, no one gives you a list of waypoints. You have to come up with them yourself. So in this case, again, we can use something like the navigation toolbox to create a map of the environment using your cameras or LiDAR sensors. And then you can find a path in that map from a beginning point to some specified endpoint using some algorithm such as RRT. So I'll show you how this one works. The reason I'm just adding links to toolboxes rather than showing the entire algorithm is because we just want to show you an outline of the tasks that you need to do for robotics design. If you want to design any of these algorithms yourself, you can do it in MATLAB or Simulink. I'm just telling you which toolboxes to use because it's simpler for beginners to start out that way. So this navigation toolbox is something quite new. This was launched just 1 year ago. So you may not have seen this if you're not on a modern release. This has inbuilt algorithms for doing 2D as well as 3D SLAM. So this one you can see it's doing optical SLAM. SLAM stands for simultaneous localization and mapping. So if you have a camera, it will look around the environment and it will use visual measurements to make a map of the environment, which you can then navigate. The 3D SLAM, again, it can be done optically or with LiDARs. So both of these are supported in the navigation toolbox. And along with the mapping feature, you also have the path planning feature. So suppose you are in this kind of occupancy grid. You built a 3D map of your environment. Now you have to move from one point to another point inside the same environment. So there are several algorithms which are built in, such as the PRM or the RRT. And what they'll do is they'll generate lots of points and they'll generate certain paths around those points and then try to find the most efficient path between different points to get from your starting to the objective. So the PRM is on the left side and then RRT is on the right side. So what RRT does is it's basically just generating a random tree. So it generates lots of points and then from that it grows lots of different paths. And then it tries to minimize the distance, the total distance that you have to travel along these paths. It tries to reduce the deviation. And over time, it's able to come up with something efficient. So you can see the video below. So the path starts, the tree starts growing from the lower left-hand side. And as the complexity of the paths increases, or as the coverage of your paths increases, it's able to switch from one solution to a more efficient solution as well. And it can navigate around this little grid type thing. The grid you get from the top algorithms and the path you get from the bottom algorithms. There's a question, how do we define the final point if the map is generated during runtime? These would typically be different steps, okay? So if you're working with a complex system, you don't jump from the ground floor to the top floor in one bound. You have to build up piece by piece, just as we are doing today. So the first step might be that you're simply driving around and trying to make a map. So you don't really have a path, you're just trying to capture as much information as possible. And then after that, maybe you want to specify the beginning point and the end point. If you want to do something more advanced, you might be able to combine these in some way, but that will require a little bit more advanced programming from your side. It will not be a ready-made solution. You'll have to build it yourself. The reason we are showing both of these is the top one is used. Suppose you have a factory warehouse type thing, or even if you know the Google cars driving around to give you the street view thing. So they are only doing the top step. The navigation is done by a human in the first instance. And once you have the environment all figured out, then you use the second step, which is path planning. So you specify the beginning and the end point, and the robot navigates autonomously. When you combine both of these, then it gets a little bit more complex. So we're not getting into that much depth for today because it's more of an introductory session. But it can all be done. People are doing it. There's a question, this is a grid-based map, right? Yeah, this is a grid-based map. So let me show you this RRT in action. Again, the algorithm is inside the same toolbox here. Actually, there's a model predictive control example as well. So the person who was interested, you can go and download this and look at that. So there's a path planning and following for a car-like vehicle using RRT example here. I'll open this. Again, we're doing the same steps. We are loading up, we're defining a vehicle. This is a 4-wheel vehicle this time. We are loading up some map, and then we'll navigate from the bottom corner to the top corner using a pure pursuit controller. So once it comes up on screen. So this is what my grid looks like. And you can see lots of little paths have been generated. And the robot is basically able to navigate along the feasible path that it's found all the way to the end. So the idea here is that if you have the grid figured out, you know the starting point and the end point, then you use the RRT algorithm or the PRM algorithm to work out the path to follow. The path serves as the waypoints. So you feed the waypoints to a pure pursuit controller. That pure pursuit controller then converts the velocities into the values for your wheels, and those wheels you control with a PID controller or something similar. Right? So step by step, we have built up to the point where if you have a grid, you can have a robot sort of navigating to the end of the grid autonomously. Okay. Let me see. Can we add moving obstacles in a grid-based map? I'm sure you can. You can definitely add moving objects in a grid-based map. I don't have an example handy for that. Maybe just search the documentation once and see. There definitely is an example where the environment is changing somewhere. I think it's an RRT, or maybe it was A star. Let me just check. So inside the navigation toolbox in the motion planning tab, if you look at examples, okay, so there's an example for dynamic replanning. That's there. If you use the autonomous driving toolbox, then you can have moving objects inside the same thing as well. So I think this example here, where there are multiple moving vehicles, this relies on the autonomous driving toolbox. This example, moving furniture inside a cluttered room, this is using purely the navigation toolbox. So the robot is trying to work out how to get to one point, how to get from one point to the other without colliding. So there are various levels of complexity here. I would suggest just go and look at the examples. And if you can't find anything, then reach out to us. We can put you in touch with someone who will know, basically. So I hope that helps. Is code generation supported for RRT? I think it is. Let me just check the algorithm itself. So if you go to motion planning and RRT, I'm sure it must be, yeah. So it says C and C++ code generation using MATLAB Coder is supported. So all of this, I believe this, all the robotics toolboxes have support for code generation if you install the local copy. Okay, so this will be code generatable. Okay. Okay, so I hope everyone's with me so far. So basically, if you want to work with autonomous navigation of mobile robots, I would highly recommend you check out first the robotic systems toolbox and second the navigation toolbox. And it will cover all these different tasks which you can see on the screen. So your perception, localization, planning, control, this entire loop can be automated for a very large part. The perception part, you can use the computer vision toolbox. For localization and planning, you can use the autonomous navigation toolbox. And for control, you can use Simulink or Simscape. So the entire end-to-end solution is basically there. And all these toolboxes, the thing about MATLAB is because it's the same team developing all these algorithms, you can be quite sure that the algorithms will work with each other. So it's not like you have to pull different libraries and build it separately. It's all in the same environment. Okay, something here. This page is just an overview of what toolbox to use where, because we were requested in this session to tell people what to use where. Okay, so just to give you an idea, if you want to build a model of your system, you would use the control system toolbox or the Simscape, etc., like we showed in the beginning. So this is what you use to build the model. For sensing, you can use the computer vision toolbox and the deep learning toolbox, and a little bit of machine learning as well, if you want. For perception and planning, then you get to automated driving toolbox, reinforcement learning, sensor fusion, and state flow. I'll show you an example of this. It's very cool. For connections, there is, the communications toolboxes, the wireless LAN, and all these coder products are there for code generation, as well as the ROS toolbox. And then the navigation toolbox and the ROS toolboxes, these are both new ones. So these add a lot of capabilities which were not there by default before. So we'll share these slides with you. If you're confused about what thing to use where, you can check out some of these. One more new thing which we have is the UAV toolbox. This was just released last month. So this fits alongside the mobile toolboxes, and that's designed specifically for UAVs. So that's really cool. You can go check it out. Okay. Now, there was this question we were being asked again and again. So this is where we deal with it. So the idea is that different tasks actually need different levels of simulation. So if you just want to do a navigation algorithm design, you can use a very simple simulation. You can use just a grid-based thing. You define a bunch of points, you figure out how to drive around. But if you want to actually design a robot which is robust, all of which systems are working together, you would then need to use the high fidelity simulations. Okay, so high fidelity simulations, again, you would use Simulink with the Simscape advanced libraries, where you would have not only the controller, but also the design of the power electronics and the mechanical side of the circuit. And you would put all of that inside the same model. So this is going to run much slower because it's a very complex simulation model. It will be computationally heavier, but this will capture all the details of your robot. So if you want to do things like torque control, if you want to work with model predictive control, etc., then you need typically a high fidelity simulation model. And let me just tell you what are the steps. We won't have time to cover everything today, but we've done most of it already. So inside the robotics loop, where you have the plant and sensor models, you can start off with a low fidelity model, which is just like that 2D thing crawling around on the screen. You can add rigid body kinematics and dynamics, which we've already seen, forward kinematics. Dynamics, the motor algorithm had the dynamic component also. With the Simscape libraries, you can add physical and electrical modeling. I'll show you a small example. And for more advanced simulations, which include the sensors and the environment models, you can co-simulate with Gazebo. So Gazebo is a very popular open source robotics development platform. And also now with Unreal Engine. This has just been released. And this is absolutely cutting edge. It's state of the art. So Unreal Engine is like a gaming engine, and you can simulate the response of all your sensors inside Unreal Engine, and then you can do the control in Simulink. So there are many steps of detail that you can go into. You typically start off here, and then you keep on building the detail as you go down these steps. That's the general idea. Simscape, I showed you the libraries already, but basically this enables physical modeling of multi-domain systems. And there are a bunch of libraries already supplied. So that motor example we saw with all those equations and all that stuff, if you use the Simscape electrical and mechanical libraries, it will just simplify down to a circuit that looks like this. So you have a resistor, inductor, motor, and friction and inertia. That's it. So some very complex mathematical equations can just be simplified down to the component level diagrams. And Simscape will figure out how to do the maths for all of this. So it takes that load off of your shoulders for high fidelity models. And with Simscape, you can design the control systems. You can do the optimized system level performance. And you can also generate code using these Simscape models. So it will work for your model predictive control or reinforcement learning or any of those things. And there are advanced libraries as well. So Simscape has the fundamental libraries. You can see in this map here, this orange thing is the thermal library. This is a pneumatic or two-phase fluid library. There are rotational and translational mechanical elements and electrical elements all inside the same Simscape model of a robot arm. Then we have Simscape multi-body for doing these 3D animation things. Then we have Simscape electrical for electrical circuits for detailed modeling of motors and semiconductors. The driveline libraries for your engine modeling, brakes, clutches, internal combustion engine, etc. And then the fluids library for hydraulics. So all of this is very rigorously tested. I mean, I can tell you I did my PhD on this and no one raised any flags. So these are very like industry standard tools, and this is what people actually use in industry as well. Okay. Where to use high fidelity models? So here I'm showing you a diagram of a robot coming in, picking up an object from a conveyor belt, and then putting it on another conveyor belt. Now, if you realize, this looks very, very simple, but in robotics, this is a very complex application. If you remember in the beginning, all those robots that I showed you, they were struggling with how to open a door handle. They were struggling how to stand up. The trouble is that basically we have force feedback built into our fingers and all of our muscles. So we don't even have to think about this. But actually, if you're building a robot, you have to think about the contact dynamics between this block and the gripper. If you apply too little force, it's just going to slip because there's not enough friction. If you apply too much force, you might damage the object or you might burn out the electronics inside the robot arm itself. So in these cases, you actually need high fidelity models, which includes the 3D CAD models, as well as the electrical circuitry inside, as well as the contact dynamics in the gripper head. So what I'm showing you here are two tools. So this one is something that's built in Simscape. This is a shipping example in the robotic systems toolbox. And on the left-hand side, what I'm showing you is Stateflow. So this is another tool which is built inside Simulink. And this is used for developing the logic for finite state machines. So you will see these blocks are highlighting at different times as the signal is being broken and as the robot is moving between different states. So Stateflow models are built using this kind of diagram. I'll show you a course you can do online if you want to learn this. And if you work in the automotive industry or the aerospace industry, medical applications, etc., Stateflow is a very commonly used tool. The reason for this is all this is code generatable. So you can make these logic diagrams. You can see how your logic is responding to changes in the environment. And then you can automatically generate the C++ code based on this model in just like a couple of clicks. So I just want to tell you that this tool exists, and then I'll show you where to find that. And inside the robot, you will have a Simscape model with the electrical part and the mechanical part, including the gears, the joints, all of that stuff. And furthermore, you can model the contact dynamics as well. So all this is inside the Simscape multi-body library. I was planning to show you one of these today, but I don't think we have time. We only have like 8 minutes left. But we'll share the slides. You can click on the hyperlinks and you'll find all the examples to model the contact dynamics as well. Okay. One more thing before we move on to how to work with ROS. So if you want to work with Gazebo or the Unreal Engine, you can work with these third-party simulators, which are outside the MATLAB Simulink environment, because these can model the environment and the sensors very, very powerfully. So let's say the simple grid-based system, for argument's sake, it cannot simulate an environment which is moving. But inside Gazebo or the Unreal Engine, you can build a complex environment which is moving around and which is photorealistic. And then whatever algorithms you're building, you can build those in something that is approximating the real world. So in real life, you would never get clearance to fly a prototype UAV inside the city like this. It's just not possible. But if you're working with Gazebo or Unreal, you can build your own street view model based on Google Maps or something similar. And you can actually have models of your camera optics and your LiDAR as well. And you can test if your navigation algorithms, etc., are working properly. So this Unreal Engine and Gazebo is supported by both the UAV toolbox and the this navigation toolbox. Right. So this is a summary of the high fidelity versus low fidelity models. So I would recommend start off with the basics, start off with the kinematics, dynamics, and the low fidelity controller. Add the physical and electrical details as time goes on and as your skill develops and as you're sure your basic algorithms are working properly. And then if you're really into designing proper real-world applications, you can co-simulate with Gazebo or Unreal Engine to also model your sensor dynamics properly. So this entire end-to-end workflow, this is the outline of what you can do. Typically, you'd start out here, if you're a student especially. Okay, just 5 minutes. So I'll talk about ROS quickly. Suppose you had to build a robot. So you would start off with a base, with a wheel that has a motor in it, and you'd figure out how to drive that motor, maybe using a joystick or a local motor controller. Then maybe you'd add a main CPU onto your system and have the CPU doing some of the control work. You might also want to get signals back into your system and then read them remotely over the Wi-Fi or something like that. Right? This is very common stuff if you want to drive your robot from a distance. You might want to have additional sensors such as an IMU or a GPS, and that will connect to your main CPU for localization. I'm just showing you all this stuff to show you how complex robotics can become very, very quickly. This is what we spend time on today, but you will need all of these different bits if you're working on a real application. So you may want to have a map server. You may want to have some kind of planning algorithms. You may want to have local and global planning algorithms. You may have cameras and a second CPU just to do the computer vision aspect. And you can see the entire thing starts to look like spaghetti now, or your noodles. So very soon, you're not really doing engineering anymore. You're just developing the framework for all these different pieces to talk to each other. And after you've done all this, you make the different algorithms, you connect the hardware, you do the wiring. You still have to write a logging system. You still have to define the parameters of your controller. You may want to record your data, play it back. You may want to simulate all this stuff. You may have to transform between the frames of your camera and your LiDAR and your map, etc. You may have multiple applications for managing all this, including the remote connection. And basically, you never catch up. Okay. So I've seen this in my real robotics applications. I have done this mistake in my PhD as well. You might run into this. So some clever person somewhere, they came up with this idea that these are standard tasks that everyone needs to do. So why don't we just write a package that will help people by automating most of these processes, such that the engineers can concentrate on the actual robot that they're building. So for that, they built this thing called ROS, which is the Robot Operating System. So this is a language-independent architecture, and it includes a lot of common algorithms for communication and configuration between different parts of your machine. And this is open source. I mean, you can get it yourself. And the idea is to enable researchers to rapidly develop robotic systems without having to reinvent the standard tools and interfaces, which is a huge pain from personal experience, I can tell you. So ROS is not an actual operating system, and it's not a programming language. I mean, basically, you just write your own algorithm and you wrap it in the ROS node, and everything else is already there for communication and for basic navigation, basic control systems, etc. So I'm running out of time. I'll just skip through how ROS works. You can read this on the slides. But the idea is that when you are doing your tasks in MATLAB or Simulink, so suppose you have a planning algorithm in MATLAB, you have a control system in Simulink, and then you want to put this on real robot hardware or inside simulation, where different components might be working on different languages, let's say. I mean, you might have computer vision algorithms in Python or OpenCV. You might have communication algorithms written in some other third-party language. The idea is that ROS is the thing that sits in the middle, and all of these things communicate via ROS. So with the ROS toolbox, MATLAB and Simulink have native support for robotics applications now. So you can put your planning algorithms into ROS, you can put your control systems into ROS, and then ROS will handle the communication between your robot hardware and the sensors and the simulation environment, etc. So you can do automatic C++ code generation, and then you can use ROS-bag import to get the data from your real hardware as well. So these facilities are now there for you. You don't have to go and write your own library. MATLAB Simulink will handle most of the communication aspect via ROS for you. And because ROS is independent of languages, so it should, in theory, work with other languages as well. I haven't tried it very much except OpenCV, but for C++ it worked perfectly. I think it should work for Python as well. Why would we want to do this? So there is a quote from ClearPath Robotics. These are the guys that make industrial robots for your warehouse applications. So they say ROS is good for robotics research and development, but not for data analysis. MATLAB, on the other hand, is not only a data analysis tool, it's a data visualization and hardware interface tool as well. So it's an excellent complement to ROS in many ways. And what these people were able to do is they were able to cut their data analysis time by 50%. And for industrial applications, you cut something by 50%. I can tell you your clients and your bosses are going to be very, very happy. So we're just about out of time. So ending here, this is the way you bridge ROS with Simulink. You do all your engineering tasks in MATLAB Simulink. You can prototype using ROS to connect to simulators or hardware. You can get the data back through ROS packs, and then you can also deploy standalone nodes if you need to. So all of this facility is now there with the ROS toolboxes. The key takeaways. So for working with autonomous systems, we need interdisciplinary engineering, we need multi-domain simulation, but we also need the right tools to simplify complex workflows. So in the space of 2 hours, if you realize, we've seen how to model a simple motor, how to develop a controller, how to start the path planning, and then how to put it all together in the same environment with co-simulation and with real hardware. So using these tools may help you out a lot, at least that's what we hope. And do try to use model-based design where you simulate first before going to hardware as something which is a standard practice in engineering, because that is where the industry is also going now. Okay, so thanks very much. These are the resources. There is a huge MATLAB repository in this location. I won't open it now. And there are online courses on MATLAB Academy, which I'll just show you just in the last minute that I have. So if you want to get started with MATLAB or Simulink or machine learning, deep learning, image processing, state flow, control design, these are free online courses at this link. I'll just put it in the chat box. And you can basically go and get started from there. If you have any questions, please just email us directly. And there's a little feedback link which we have. So please, if you could fill that out, that would be quite helpful. Thanks. So I'll take any questions now. Is there any extra hardware interface required for ROS? I mean, you will need a piece of hardware to run that. So it can be something like a Raspberry Pi or some other kind of board. ROS is just a software. It has to be installed on some kind of Linux system. I think it works for Windows now as well, but Linux is usually easier for development. Okay, so thanks very much for attending. We hope this has been useful.
Okay, so moving on to the vote of thanks. Yeah.
One general question, not directly connected to the session. Some people are messaging and asking, especially students, for campuses which are having campus-wide license, can these people use it from their home? Is it possible?
Yes, yes. So if it's on a campus-wide license, you can take it, install it on your personal machine. There is no restriction.
Any geographic limit because of this COVID restriction, people ask?
No, no, nothing. You can use it anywhere in the world. You don't need internet access. It's just like any other piece of software.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. So with that, I think officially we can conclude the session. So I hope that still IEEE RAS chapter of Kerala section can collaborate again with further events with MathWorks and team. Thank you all once again for joining. Yeah.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you all.
Thank you, ma'am, for organizing this.